Hello and welcome to the Stratford Literary Festival Goes Virtual, and in particular to this event in which two authors have very kindly agreed to take us on a virtual tour of Britain's cathedrals. My name is Julia Wheeler and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by those two authors. Christopher Somerville has written Ships of Heaven, The Private Life of Britain's Cathedrals, and Andrew Ziminski has written The Stonemason, A History of Building Britain, and these are fantastic companion pieces, as you can imagine. Welcome to Stratford, gentlemen, delighted to have you here. Let's begin by asking you, where are you, how's lockdown, and how much of your normal working life are you able to get on with during these different times?
Well, I'm in Somerset in a cottage. I'm looking out of my window at the most beautiful view of a hillside, trees on the top, and silver and grey clouds dashing past. I'm extremely lucky because I've got a lovely community here, and I'm able to leave the front door and go on, I don't know, a dozen, 20, 30 different walks, different footpaths through woods with this wonderful spring we've been having. A spring has been everywhere, and so it's been just delightful. So frankly, I'm enjoying it. As far as my work's concerned, my main work is journalistic work, is doing walks for the Times. The Times can't be seen to be encouraging people to go walking, so they've postponed, paused, quarantined my walks for the time being. However, they've asked me to do a nice special about favourite walks of mine and so on, so I'm certainly keeping busy, and also I'm scribbling away at the next book I've got and that sort of thing. So, never an idle moment, as always.
Andrew, how about you?
Well, I have to say, Christopher has taken the words out of my mouth. I'm actually having quite a nice lockdown. I'm enjoying seeing spring come into its own in slow motion, and I'm spending time in the workshop. I'm scratching my head over my next book, and I'm building a new workshop. So I'm in Frome, by the way, and our community around here is really great. Everyone's looking after each other. I think we need to count our blessings, really. No one's got ill in our neighbourhood yet, so touch wood.
Well, it sounds like you're both busy on the next books, but we're here to talk about the books that you have recently published. So it's been lovely for me pulling out the threads and similarities between them, the sort of dovetailing of reading these two books together. And one of the things that jumped out at me is, if a cathedral can indeed jump out, was Wells Cathedral. Because Christopher, you say that this is your cathedral, really, isn't it? Just tell us about the first time that you were there and how important it is for you.
Well, it's about a mile and a half from the place I am at the moment. And it was my, if you like, my childhood cathedral. My first moment about realising that cathedrals were like ships was at the age of about 5 or 6, falling flat on my back outside the cathedral, having had that phenomenon where you look up at a building in a high wind and all the clouds are going one way, the building appears to be coming towards you. And I can remember literally being run down and drowned by this massive great building apparently piling through the sky towards me. And I used to be left in there on my own sometimes, if mum and dad had other things to do with Wells. So I really got to know that wonderful clock, that marvellous, is it the oldest clock face in the world or something like that, with the knights that go around fighting each other, and the dragons on the capitals, the wonderful carving. I think that's where I first began to think about stonemasons, actually, even at a young age, and how they left their character behind. The grape stealers is the famous one, with somebody being beaten up by a farmer for pinching his grapes. And there's something so humorous and observant about that. I think even then, it sort of struck me that stonemasons must be something a bit special.
Well, there you go, Andrew. There's a cue for you. Let's talk about that facade of Wells Cathedral. For you, professionally, how impressive is that?
Well, my head is at Salisbury, I have to say, because that's where I trained. But my heart, along with Chris, is at Wells, and the West Front is absolutely beyond compare. It's the greatest collection of medieval sculpture still in situ in Europe, really. I mean, the quality of the carving is debatable, it's fair to say, but it's the quantity that makes it, and the all-encompassing scheme. It's basically a grandstand where the saints and the kings and queens and the folk from the Old Testament are looking, are looking down on us instead of us looking up at it. But as Chris is saying, lying down on your back in front of the West Front is the only way to see it with a pair of binoculars. I've done that on a few occasions, once after our Christmas party, but that's another story.
When you say the quality isn't necessarily there, for you, how do you judge that? What is it that you're looking for?
Well, with respect to the sculpture alone, I mean, it is very refined. It's the sculpture has been cut in a classical tradition. There's a lot of foreshortening. They're playing with certain optical illusions to allow the sculpture to be read more successfully from the ground than up close. But it's just lacking in a degree of finessing and sophistication. It's good, but it's not great. It's like compared to some places in Europe, it's not quite there, but it's ours and it's good enough. And that's where my heart is. So, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about Salisbury then. Take us there, Andrew, and your training.
Well, I trained at Open Air Museum, the Weald Downland Museum in West Sussex, and I had the very good fortune to be doubled up with this old guy. He'd been a tarmacker and a curb layer, and his life was very much like a Thomas Hardy character. He had a real thick Sussex accent. He was quite remarkable. Just a working son of the soil, a toiler, But he taught me everything I needed to know about how to slake lime and how to cut straight edges into limestone. And I was quite young at that point. I thought, well, I need to take this further. And then I went to Weymouth College, did a masonry and conservation course, and then I was taken on at the Cathedral where they brought us on. So that was working at the transition point of where the tower, the square tower meets the octagonal spire. And that's quite a challenging place to work because of the weather, the unremitting nature of the wind, the perpetual smells that come up from the city. The brewery was, the hops, the boiling of the hops or whatever they do was, a great torment. But not a greater torment as working at Trowbridge, where the pork pie factory and the brewery were next to each other. So we were constantly assailed with delicious smells.
A definite temptation. Christopher, I wonder whether you could put Salisbury and its spire in the context of other cathedrals around the country, because it really is quite a special cathedral, isn't it?
Yes, it is. For a start, it's built all of a piece, which is not like any other cathedral in the country. It was all built in 40 years, bang, smack, early English style. So when you go to it, most cathedrals, if you go to them, they're a lovely mishmash. Bishop so-and-so put that there, so somebody decided you want to be buried there, so we had that changed. There can be 400 years of development of architectural styles. Not just that, but people's vanities and pretensions as well. Salisbury is all one, bang. And that was because the old Salisbury Cathedral at Old Sarum, the Iron Age hill fort above it, had to be abandoned. And so they just did it in a better place, and they did it better, if you like. So it's got that. Also,
why did it have to be abandoned, Christopher? Why did it need to be abandoned?
It was a bit like Andrew says. It was the old cathedral was too windy. It was difficult to hear yourself preach there. Difficult to hear yourself pray. They said the winds kept ripping the roof off. There wasn't enough water. There was a garrison of very funky soldiery up there who didn't like the clerics of the cathedral and used to, bar their way and taunt them and tease them and bash them and so on. It was a really unhappy place for a long time. And then when the bishop decided that's enough, I'll apply to the Pope, get a license to build a new one, they were so relieved to build that lovely cathedral down in the water meadows and start a medieval town nearby. So it's all of a piece. That's the striking thing about it. And the spire is a work of genius, but it's also obviously a work of faith pointing to the heavens. When you go inside, there's a wooden frame inside, which was a medieval frame, purportedly put up to support the spire. But in fact, the man who shows you around says, have a close look. When you do, no part of that wooden frame is fixed to the stone. It's just hanging there and supporting a load of ladders, up which some unfortunate so-and-so has to climb every 4 years, and then up the outside of the spire to the top to change the light bulb.
I hope they didn't get you to change the light bulbs, Andrew.
No, but we did used to go up in our lunch times, not quite legitimately. I mean, it was so strictly out of bounds with those rotten, wormy wooden old ladders. But there's a door right at the top of the spire called the weather door, and you can feel the top of the spire just moving around like I am now. It's quite unnerving, especially with the door open and the wind's like gushing through. But it was the cathedral's 800th birthday on, was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, so and of course the great sadness is that they had a whole load of events planned to celebrate this wonderful occasion, but of course it's all locked up. And I think that's one of the great, I mean, there are so many great sadnesses. I mean, as Christopher and I are saying, we're counting our blessings, but there are so many sadnesses at the moment with the obvious reasons. But the fact that the churches and cathedrals are closed, no matter what your faith is, I think is really terrible. St. Paul's and Westminster Abbey stayed open during the Blitz. And, if you want an open space for reflection where you can easily distance yourself, the cathedral should stay open. Controversial,
yeah. I did notice actually that there's a news story about connected but not connected peregrine falcons. There's a webcam on the at the bottom of that spire where peregrine falcons have built a nest, and people can kind of, obviously not the same, but can sort of zoom in and see that. We can't talk about cathedrals and cathedral masonry without talking about flying buttresses. And I think the difference between, Andrew, Wells Cathedral and Salisbury Cathedral is that Wells, they're hidden, but Salisbury, they're very much on show. And you were involved in renovating those at Salisbury, I believe.
That's right. I mean, I was really green then. I was by no means an important player. I was just doing the hefting and the grunting and the laying on of mortar and all that. But flying buttresses, to quote the Arabic that the arch never sleeps, transfer the huge amounts of thrust, the 7,000 tons of the spire down through the tower and out to the ground. And that principle will only work if there is a pinnacle on top of the buttress to push it down even further. So the one we were working on had rotten like normally these are pyramidal in shape. We all know what a pinnacle looks like, but this had eroded to the shape of a witch's hat. It was quite conical, and it was mainly coal and soot and airborne pollution that had destroyed it, really. So we built this back up in stages to keep the weight transfer. But of course, the moment you lift the weight off the buttress, you've got to think, is the buttress just going to push out sideways? So there was a lot of thought given to the propping by additional scaffolding and those sort of needs.
So there's so much that goes into this from the mason's point of view. But once these cathedrals are built, Christopher, there's a lot within it as well, and actually to keep them going today, or in normal times, if you like. I noticed that you dedicate your book to the holy dusters, I believe, of Salisbury Cathedral.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I was in there looking around, and there was a lady she had a homemade machine, which was a stick with a hoover brush on the end, and she was cleaning the ears and nostrils of the second Earl of Hertford, I think. And she said,
Was he there? I thought he was
Yeah.
dead.
No, he was there. No, it's one of the privileges of high rank. And she said, we call ourselves the Holy Dusters. And actually, it's very nice. She said, if you look further down the aisle, you'll find the Mompessons, that's right, husband and wife lying together, beautiful painted tomb. She said the paintwork is so delicate, I don't actually dare to dust it, so I just go up and down it going, blowing all the dust off myself. Their hands are joined together in prayer, but the mason or the sculptor left a very slight gap between their fingers, and she says about every second week she'll find a chocolate biscuit has been lodged there. So somebody obviously appreciates the Holy Dusters as well as myself.
Let's talk about stained glass windows, Christopher. We've got the stone side of it, but those windows are often, usually iconic, aren't they? And they're actually quite a big draw for people to go to cathedrals. Which cathedral within the country would you perhaps pick out as a special favourite?
Well, there's two really. There's Canterbury, but because they're superb, and because I actually met and went round with and was very decently treated by the main conservator of glass, and those are wonderful stained glass windows, particularly the ambulatory, which is the bit at the end where the pilgrims went round to Thomas à Becket's tomb. The blues, the greens, and the reds are quite stunning, and they're from the 1280s. So they've been there for 800 years. The other one, of course, is York, the Great East Window, which is the size, famously, of a tennis court, and was done in 1403 to 1408 by John Thornton, who was the famous glazier. And it's basically heaven and hell, or it's the beginning and the end. Paradise, the Garden of Eden, everything in Technicolor, everybody happy, big smiles on the faces of the fishes in particular for some reason. The fishes look manically happy. And then the bottom half is the apocalypse, where there's fearsome looking angels holding vials of wrath, pouring blood out all over everybody, and all the citizens down on the ground clutching their heads as if the end of the world is coming, which it is. It's a complete window into the medieval mind, and a stunning piece of artwork. I'm sure Andrew knows it. It's quite remarkable.
There's just huge symbolism both in those windows, but also, Andrew, within the carving and within the buildings as a whole, isn't there?
Well, as Chris is saying, any resurrection scheme is just worthy of study, really. Unfortunately, my favourite is in France, in Autun, but that's we can't talk about French cathedrals here.
Oh, I think we can. I was going to ask you actually about Notre Dame and the sort of the renovation and so on going on there.
Yeah, well, I was involved in quite an interesting debate at Bristol Architecture Centre last year, where there've been a number of wacky proposals about building swimming pools on the roof and shopping outlets and all mad stuff like that. And I'm a traditionalist, not in an American right-wing conservative way, but I like to do things properly, and that was just a red rag to a bull. And basically everyone in the audience, it was at the Arnold Feeney, completely had a vote at the end, and everyone agreed that it should be put back to exactly how it was, especially the flesh that that came down. But my goodness, that I've been involved in a lot of ancient buildings that were subject to fire. And it does the stone no good at all, especially when it was being cooled down. So you're getting this, sort of microscopic shock going on within the core of the stone. So even though the vaulting may look okay at Notre Dame, I have a suspicion that it is beyond okay. And 5 years was hugely ambitious for a restoration anyway. But we shall see.
But you say in the book that actually it's thanks to the skill and the forward thinking of the masons who built it that it's not been more damaged, really, that there was some protection in that structure.
Yeah, well, fire was a commonplace in the medieval world, especially in churches and cathedrals. And stone vaults were built to be self-sustaining, so the roof structure is just to keep the water off, basically. So the strength of the vault and the flying buttresses and all the associated engineering, keeps it all together.
Mm.
But the problem at Notre Dame is just the huge quantities of water that went into the stonework. So it's basically, the stonework's being heated to 1,000 degrees, and then you're pouring water on, which in the Middle Ages obviously they couldn't do. They just let the thing burn out, scrape all the charred timbers off, and the stonework was okay. But because of the rapid cooling effect of the fire hoses, it's basically it will over time turn it into lime or lime mortar, which is not great really. So I think they've got some problems there. So bizarrely, it's Donald Trump's crazy idea of having a helicopter drop what water onto the vaults while it was burning would have just caused the vaults to collapse and anyway.
Yeah, we'll leave that. We'll leave
Yeah,
that one
moving
there.
on. Yeah.
That is, sorry, just saying, that's really fascinating about the effect of the water on the hot stone. Can I ask Andrew a question?
Please do.
I wonder whether he knew the work of Gilbertus.
Yes, I do. At Autun,
Yeah.
his Great West Porch and his carvings, his sensual and delicate carvings there. Yeah, I mean that's if when I go to my secret place, I sort of go to Autun and I go to that little room at the top of the above the porch where his sculptures are now kept, and my God, I weep. There's not been a sculptor like him since, I don't think. Anyway, yeah.
I wondered if you were going to say that, because he's to me he's the absolute top gold standard, and I wondered if you thought anybody had touched him since.
Yeah. Well, Michelangelo and all geniuses, and all that sort of stuff's great, but this is so human and so immediate. What he achieves is, as a sculptor, is not just that. It's he could do sensuality, he can do piety, he can do forgiveness. You just need to glance at what he's carving and you understand what he's trying to say. It's mad. But of course, there's a school of thought that Gilbertus isn't the actual artist. That's the name of the sponsor, isn't it? But I don't subscribe to that. Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? He's still a genius, and he's there praying just underneath the. It says Gilbertus made this underneath the resurrection panel at Autun, and there's a little figure of him just praying, being. Oh no, he's like that. His hands are open, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
As if giving something.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure I've got a photo here.
Christopher, I wonder whether you would take us to St Paul's in London.
Well, I would willingly if I could.
It's bloody closed.
In our imaginations, give us a tour.
Let's move on. I've always found St Paul's, and particularly when I went to look at it, I found it a strange place. It's a leap forward into the Baroque. That's one thing you could say about it. It's rounded, it's tall, it's graceful, it's way over dramatic, and it's remarkable in that sense. But the atmosphere there is something quite odd. It's quite clubby, quite exclusive, I felt. And unlike most cathedrals, I didn't think that it was a particularly welcoming place. I felt, and it's just because it's in the centre of London, everybody's buzzing in, buzzing out, and there's a feeling perhaps that the clergy are, they haven't got the time for people, which most people there have got. I'm sure you're disgusted if St Paul's will immediately write in, that's fine, but that's what I felt about it. What's wonderful about it is its militaristicness, its colonial delights. It's not a fashionable thing to say, but there are so many ladies and gentlemen in fabulous uniforms, rearing horses, dying generals, sailors in the act of being cut in two by cannonballs, and encomia, which absolutely froth and foam with phrases, you know, about the glories and having fallen at the never to be forgotten siege of Seringapatam and all this stuff. If you want to know about how this tiny little island rose and how its sense of itself and its pride in itself rose over those few centuries, St Paul's is your man, I think.
That's interesting, isn't it? And it's slightly ironic from an international point of view in that it was also the location for the anti-globalization protests and the controversy with Giles Fraser
yes.
around those.
Yes, that's right. He was the dean, and was he the dean?
I think he was.
Yeah. Anyway, he was a senior figure there, and he was so upset and disturbed by their response to the anti-globalization movement that he resigned, and he sort of had a breakdown afterwards, which he admits himself. He writes and talks about himself. It was interesting that they chose St Paul's, as you say. I think really it was because they felt that St Paul's would be more sympathetic to them sitting on its front doorstep for a few months than the City of London would, which is what they were actually claiming to be against. So it was a remarkable movement, and the church didn't handle it particularly well at first, although I think things improved later. But their first reaction was not very helpful.
In terms of the architecture, Andrew, you draw a line in your book from Islamic influences down into St Paul's. Tell us about that whole side of things, and also about, I mean, we think of these cathedrals as very British, but a lot of them were built by migrant labour, journeymen travelling around, you know, different countries and bringing their own influences, weren't they?
Nicely put. Yeah, my abiding impression of St Paul's Cathedral is that it's got a pair of minarets out the front and a whopping great dome. And Christopher Wren was a great fan of what he referred to as the Saracenic approach. And in his survey, he did a very thorough survey of the state of the spire and the tower and the buttressing at Salisbury Cathedral. He was a Wiltshire man, so he knew it well. And he was really influenced by this idea that Gothic architecture came from the East by virtue of the Crusades. And that's something I've been interested in a long, long time. You know, we have this idea that, you know, these are our cathedrals, but even if you're looking, you know, even if we go back into prehistory, you know, Stonehenge was not built by British people. It was built by people from the Low Countries, and then maybe after a couple of generations, blue-eyed, fair-haired folk who'd come from the steppe, you know, of Russia and the Ukraine. You know, this is what the DNA says, and then you reflect on Rome and Bath. And you know, we were working in Walcott Street in Bath when around the time that Nigel Farage was excluded from a certain pub there. And the burials that have come up at Walcott Street, I thought, I just had this sort of image in my head. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book is just my personal feelings about these things, is that, you know, Walcott was absolutely full of people who'd come from all over the Roman Empire. There's a guy who had come from the country that is now known as Syria. I know these are not cathedrals, but it's coming to my point that no Islam, no pointed arch, no flying buttresses, no squinches. Now, squinches are arches that cross the corner points of a square planned structure, and that allows the support of a dome. So no squinches, no spire at Salisbury Cathedral. I could go on, you know, but architecture is a great and beautiful mix of people and materials from all over what was known as the known world.
And a brilliant example of exactly how interconnected we all are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Christopher, let me bring things back round to nearer to Stratford. And I believe that the nearest cathedral in your book to Stratford is Coventry, which is a very different sort of cathedral, isn't it?
Yes. So somebody explained to me that if you like, a classic cathedral was taking the stone and carving the cathedral out of the stone, whereas later on you took a building, you built the building, and then you made it into a cathedral by hanging stuff from the stone or fixing it into it. And so there's a good Coventry would be one of the latter. It was the if you the last English cathedral, I suppose, to be conceived in that way. And it was built that way because it was the original cathedral was destroyed, ruined during a bombing raid in 1940. And what you now have is the skeleton of the old cathedral, blackened and roofless, really just a hollow box of fabulous stone, fixed to the new cathedral like a shadow. And that's very appropriate because the new cathedral is all about reconciliation. It's all about hope for the future. It's also about atonement and pain and despair and self-disgust. It's a very, very powerful mixture of real feelings that people actually felt after living through, perpetrating or suffering an episode like the Second World War. And so it's extremely powerful. And the new cathedral, which is full of the most fantastic artworks, is shackled forever by the fact it's actually fixed to the old cathedral. So it's a bit like a sort of brave new person leaping forward, but dragging this black shadow at their heels. And that makes it obviously even more poignant and significant.
I wonder, Andrew, if you can imagine the sorts of monuments that we'll be building after we come through this time.
Oh, goodness, there's a question. I was just going to say to Christopher, that's my favourite chapter in the book, and especially the moment where you turn round, just as you get to the East End. That's not the East End, but the moment where you turn round and you have this moment where you go, oh yeah, I get it, fantastic, and then it's Father forgive, not forgive them. You know, I love that. Yeah. Sorry, Julia. What was the question? What do we? Yeah.
Well, I wonder whether it's open to either of you, and there may or may not be an answer. But the sort of monuments. I mean, after the First World War, every village in the country has a memorial. Every town has a memorial to its dead. As you just said, Coventry Cathedral arose again out of after the Second World War. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about the sorts of things that may be set in stone after this particular period.
I personally, I think actions are more important. I think the church needs to open, and it needs to open its doors now, and it needs to embrace people and allow people in. It's, health and safety. Yeah, let people in. That's the monument that needs to be, instead of turning your back, being safe, be risky. People need it now. People really need it. So there.
Anything you'd add, Christopher?
That's a fantastic thing to say, Andrew. And I think I agree with you. I think that in the year 2000, I wished that we could have built a cathedral, a religious building for all faiths, and we could have done it. Something fabulous, because we were celebrating the 2000th birth of Jesus Christ. What did we do? We built that wonderful empty monument to vanity and ridiculousness, which was the Dome. Admittedly, I did go there to see a madness a couple of years ago, and it was great. So there was that. But I think we should build a cathedral. I think we should commission Andrew to build it. And I think there should be a fabulous cathedral somewhere, of which the message carved over the door is just what he said: "Come in, be welcome, open up."
Mm. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. That's, real food for thought. I said at the beginning that these two books are fantastic companions for the time. Thank you, Andrew. Partly because they're both big picture, but also you can really get into the minutiae, into the detail, and I think that's really important. I'm certainly finding that that's useful at the moment. So thank you so much for being in Stratford and for spending the time. Wishing you well. Thank you to everybody for being here and being on this virtual guide. I would just say that the winter weekend that Stratford always has in November is being planned at the moment for the 20th to the 22nd, so do please put that in your diary. And do please keep coming back to the website to see more conversations. There's plenty there to keep you company through this time. So, gentlemen, Andrew Ziminski and Christopher Somerville, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Julia.
Great. What a treat. Thank you very much.
Yeah.